Your video
Okay.
is stuck, Mr. Keith.
Morning, everybody.
Mr. Kit, you're frozen on the screen. Your video is frozen.
Hang on. Can you hear me, or is it?
Yeah, we can
Yes,
hear
we
you.
can hear, but we can't see you moving.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Huh? I'm not moving. Maybe now. Can you see me? Can you see me moving?
No,
No, we
actually.
cannot.
You can just stop your video for once and then once again.
I'm gonna go out and hang on.
Yes, we can see you right now. You are muted. You're the co-host, so
Seems like I'll have to just a moment. You please unmute yourself. Yeah.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
Are we okay now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Let's get going then. Okay. So, ladies, gentlemen, Italy, the neighbor of France. As you can see, France is right next door. Similarities between Italy and France. They both produce a lot of wine. They sort of go back and forth between number one producer, each doing approximately 1/3 of all wine that is produced in the world. So it's a huge volume being produced. But what we do see differences between them is Italy, they make wine pretty much everywhere. As you can see, there is wine regions all across the country. So there's a lot more areas where wine is being produced. I think it's like 1 million acres of vineyard throughout Italy. They also have almost 1,000 different grape varieties. So it is without a doubt the most difficult country in the world to sort of know everything about their wines, because there is this vast geographical area, 20 different wine regions, and within each of the wine regions they have a number of sub-regions, and within each of these sub-regions you have different grape varieties can be used. So it is not one country that you really need to specialize in unless you have to, because it's really difficult. I love Italian wine, I love Italian food, and I love going to Italy. But I don't like learning about Italy because it's super complex. But we'll give you just the basics to sort of understand about Italy. It is one of the oldest wine producing areas in the world, number one. It is known for a huge variety of different styles of wine. And again, shares with the wine. 1 second.
Mr. Kid, I'm sorry for interrupting.
As I mentioned, it is the...
we cannot hear you properly.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure why. I'm not sure why. I have this... I don't know. Can you hear me now or no?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Okay, let's try. let's try to continue. If we have an issue with it, maybe we might have to reschedule. I'm just having some issues on my side. Connection. Just had to restart my. Okay, so Italian wine is sold all over the world and is very, very popular throughout the world. And they have been a mainstay on international wine lists for decades and decades and decades. Italian wines, I know when I first started working in a restaurant, the Italian wines were on the list. They're very popular. Italy, not only do they produce a lot of wine, they also consume a lot of wine personally. They're in the top 5 per capita consumers in the world. On average, the Italians consume about 56 bottles of wine per person per year, on average. So half drink more, half drink less. That's a lot when you consider India consumes 1 tablespoon of wine per year. So big difference in the consumption of wine. Italy, again, 1,000 different grape varieties makes for a very complex country. Here is Italy again. Again, different grape varieties that are being done in each area. Let's talk about the main grape varieties. I don't expect you to remember the 1,000 grape varieties because that would not be feasible. But let's think about the main white grapes and the main black grapes. For black grapes, we have Nebbiolo, Barbera, and Sangiovese. These are the 3 most popular grapes coming out of Italy. Nebbiolo is a very full-bodied, intense grape. Makes for a very, very powerful wine. It is the grape of Barolo and Barbaresco. And like in France, in the old world, we have place name wines, wines that are named after the place, not the grape variety. So we have Barolo and Barbaresco. We have Soave, Gave. These are the names of the wines, but the grape variety is different. In Chianti, the grape variety is Sangiovese. In Soave, the grape variety is Garganega. In Gavi, the grape variety is Cortese. So we need to understand the grape varieties that are being used in these areas because that will let us know a little bit about how the wine is going to taste. The one exception to the rule is Pinot Grigio. It's a very, very popular grape variety in Italy and around the world. And they put it on the label because everyone loves Pinot Grigio. So when they go to the wine shop, they're going to look for the label, they're going to look for Pinot Grigio. Classification system. There are 4 tiers of classification in Italy when it comes to quality. And again, with every pyramid, at the bottom of the pyramid, we have the lower quality, and at the top of the pyramid, we have the higher quality. But as we go up the pyramid, the quantity becomes less as well. So at the bottom of the pyramid in Italy, we have VDT, or Vino da Tavola, table wine. This is a very simple wine, typically very inexpensive, produced in large quantities. This is actually the wine that is consumed most by the Italians. Of those 54 bottles per year on average they're drinking, they're not spending, 5,000 rupees for a bottle. They're spending maybe 200 rupees for a bottle, 300 rupees for a bottle. They can get a decent bottle of table wine for that price. So we have VDT at the very bottom. IGT is the next level, and IGT was actually created for a category of wines called Super Tuscans. So when we talk about Tuscany, I'll get into a little bit more detail on that particular category. And then we have the DOC and the DOCG. So if we look at each one, VDT, table wine, the basic wine, mainly used for local consumption. IGT means that the wine is coming from a particular area. Oops, sorry. Created for those super Tuscans, and I'll get to that. And then we have DOC. DOC is now Denominazione Origine Controllata. Basically means we now have a designated area, a physical designated area, and then within that area, the wine has to be made a particular way. And the grapes have to be from a approved list of grapes for that particular area. Keeping in mind, DOC and DOCG, there are hundreds of them throughout Italy, and each one is going to be different. I like to refer to it as, once you get into these classified areas, there's a particular recipe for how to make the wine. And the recipe states how the grapes can be grown, how the wine can be made, how long it has to be aged, and then it has the approved list of ingredients. Grape varieties that are allowed for that. Guarantee, and basically they take these of a particular standard using approved ingredients, and they submit the wine to a government agency, and the government agency takes it one step further, where they actually do a chemical analysis of the wine to make sure that it's clean and no bad things in it. For example, in India, we have the FSSI. Remember when they did the chemical analysis of Maggi noodles and they found a lot of bad things going on in the Maggi noodles? It's very similar to situations that we have in Italy. They'll do a chemical analysis of the wine to make sure everything is correct. And then they actually have a tasting panel. And the tasting panel will actually taste the wine to make sure that it has achieved a particular level of quality. And if the people at the tasting panel think the wine reaches a particular quality, then they give them the approval and they get the garantita. So that's the highest classification. These are the 20 different wine regions in Italy. We're not going to go through each and every one of the wine regions. We're going to go through some of the major wine regions. And we'll go into a little bit more detail about the wine, the grapes that are used, and the famous wines from that region. Let's start with Piedmont, or you can also refer to it as Piemonte, which is the way it's pronounced in Italy. It is at the very top of Italy, and it actually shares a border with France. So we're going to get potentially some influences of winemaking styles from France. Piedmont is one of the most popular areas. They make very, very good quality wines. They make the wines of Barolo and Barbaresco, which we discussed earlier, which uses the grape Nebbiolo. Barolo and Barbaresco are very, very complex world, is made to be consumed pretty much as soon as it's sold. Where these wines are actually made to age, they actually taste better and the wine becomes more interesting if they've been able to age for a period of maybe 5 to 10 years. And again, the majority of all wine that is produced in the world is made to be drunk pretty much right away. But the Barolo and the Barbaresco and some of these other famous wines in Italy are wines that actually require a certain amount of age for them to get to the level that they can be most appreciated. We also have Barbera as a grape that is used in this area, and Barbera is a little lighter, a little more easy drinking. And we have Dolcetto. Dolcetto is another grape for red wine. Dolcetto is a little bit more intense in flavor, and again, Barbera is a lighter style. And in this region, we also have Asti Spumante. And Asti Spumante is a very famous sparkling wine, but it comes from Italy and comes from this region. It's made with the tank method, which you'll learn about when you learn about how sparkling wines are made. It's a lot less expensive than champagne, which is a much more complex method to make. Next area is Ligneria. And Ligneria actually is this very skinny wine growing area that goes right along the Mediterranean. So it's a coastal area where the vineyards, and again, whenever we're growing grapes near the sea, you're getting this cooling influence that happens from the sea. So these cooler areas are more suited for white grape varieties, but it is also more suited then for the food that is consumed in this area, because this area is very close to the sea. So the majority of the food that they consumed is obviously coming from the sea. Fresh fish and seafood pairs very well with white wine. Again, located on the Italian Riviera, very beautiful area. It is also a famous area because it holds the fishing villages. There's 5 fishing villages referred to as the Cinque Terre, and it is one of the most popular tourist destinations for Italy. And you can actually walk from village to village to village. There's these series of paths that go all along the coast that connect these 5 villages. Sometimes it takes up to an hour or so to get from village to village, but you can actually walk the entire area, and it's very, very beautiful. And again, produces these beautiful white wines. They use Bosco, Albarolo, and Vermentino. And Vermentino is a very popular white grape variety now that produces quite a delicious white wine. Again, very suited for fresh fish and seafood. Lombardi is here in the middle between Piedmont and Veneto. Lombardi is known for its sparkling wines. It also produces red, white, and rosé wines made from a variety of local grape varieties, but they also make a lot of wine from the international grape varieties: Cabernet, Merlot, Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc. They produce a ton of wines. It's a big, big powerhouse in production of wine, huge volumes of wine, some of great quality, some of just more commercial levels. Friuli over here. And again, as we get closer to here, we're right near Switzerland. And so we're getting a lot of Germanic influences. And we see that especially in Friuli. It's very northeast Italy. Not only is it very far north where it's cooler, it's also getting quite high up in elevation because we're approaching the mountains as we get up there. A lot of DOC designation wines, which means the quality is very good. Large volume of white wine being produced here. Again, cooler area, more suited for white grapes, white wine. We're having this Slavic Germanic influence in the wine styles. The next area is Veneto, and Veneto is actually an area that we went to on the wine tour last year. So Veneto is home to 3 very, very popular red wines coming from Italy. We have Amarone, which I'm going to get into a little more detail on Amarone, how it's made. It's actually done in a particular way, which is kind of interesting. Valpolicella, which is a very fruity, easy drinking wine. It is also home to Soave. Soave is a very famous white wine made with the Garganega grape that we discussed. And also Prosecco. Prosecco is produced in Veneto as well. Just restarting my computer. Sorry, I'm having some problems. And the interesting thing about Veneto is they actually really embrace modern practices when producing wine. In Italy, they actually have been making wine in a lot of areas in Italy. They've been making wine for exactly the same way for hundreds and hundreds of years, and there's not a lot of evolution. But in Veneto, they actually embrace some modern techniques. Again, we've got the Valpolicella, Amarone, and Bordolino for red. They're also producing a lot of wines with the international grape varieties of Cabernet, Chardonnay, and Pinot Noir. And again, we're seeing that throughout Italy. We're going to find other areas in Italy where they produce a lot of these international grape varieties. Again, typically the French grape varieties they started. And the reason for this is they're actually able to grow wine quite well in Italy. It's very suited for that. And they can actually do it a little bit less expensive than they can in France. So that's why we're seeing a lot of these sort of international grapes, are wines of international, that people want, being produced in Italy, just because they can do it there cheaper. Again, white wines, about 55% of the grapes going there. But the interesting is the Amarone. And Amarone is a wine that is made in Veneto, but they do it in a particular way, which is kind of unusual. They pick the grapes when they're perfectly ripe, and they put them on these bamboo mats. And these bamboo mats, the grapes are put in single layers, and they're put on these bamboo mats. And this is a close-up picture that I took when we were visiting the winery in Veneto. But what you don't see here is this actually is just a couple of racks. It went up 2 stories tall, and 2 stories worth of these racks full of these grapes. And then it was in this huge warehouse. So there was probably thousands of these racks throughout this warehouse. And what they did is they leave the grapes for about 3 months. And during 3 months, the water the grapes start to dry a little bit. So we lose about 30% of the water, the moisture that is in the grape. So what we end up with is a very, very concentrated grape juice by the time they press it. And this concentrated grape juice creates these much more interesting, complex, powerful wines than you would have if they didn't dry out the grapes. For example, Valpolicella is a very fruity, light drinking wine, but they use the same grapes in Amarone that they do in Valpolicella, but in Amarone, they dry them out, concentrating the flavors, very big, very powerful. And then we come to Tuscany, and Tuscany in the center of Italy has really perfect wine growing condition along the coast for the white wines. Inland, where it's warmer, we're getting great growing areas for the red wines. This is home to Chianti, which is probably the most famous wine in Italy. Everyone knows Chianti. It's quite famous for, it was the original bottles, kind of like a flask-shaped bottle that had a basket, a wicker basket woven around it. This is what people know as Chianti. You don't see this basket very much anymore. It's a bit for the tourists, but it was originally done that way. Chianti and Brunello di Montalcino are primarily made with the Sangiovese grape. Tuscany is known for its very famous Vin Santo, which is a dessert wine that is produced there. And it was in the 1970s that we had a new class of wines known as Super Tuscans. And this was a very important time in wine production in Italy, because Italy, as I had mentioned, Italy typically doesn't like to change. They've been making wine the same way for years and years and years. And there was a small group of wine producers in Tuscany that were looking at what was going on in the international market. And in the international market, they were embracing the grape varieties from France. They were drinking Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot. And the Italians knew that these grapes were quite famous because, again, these are the grapes of Bordeaux. And Bordeaux at the time was making these incredibly quality wines. And it was these particular grape varieties that we started to see planted in the New World. California, Australia, Argentina, Chile. They were planting these French grape varieties, and there was a huge demand for it. So some of these Italian producers were experimenting with growing these French grapes and making wine from them. And again, it doesn't seem like it's that complicated, but the history between France and Italy is a long history, and and like many countries that share a border, they don't always get along. I think we have a good example if we look at India and Pakistan. Okay, share a border, don't get along. France and Italy were the same. They didn't get along because in the war, Italy went with Germany. So, and again, over centuries, they've always had problems. So the concept of an Italian person, an Italian winery growing French grapes would be, and actually they were met, there was some younger family members that were coming back to the winery and talking with the parents and the grandparents and saying, you know, let's experiment with growing these grapes because they're hugely popular in the New World. The United States, which is a big market, really likes this Cabernet Merlot. And the parents and the grandparents were going, are you blanking kidding? We are not going to plant those god darn French grapes anywhere on our property. And it got to the point where the new generation who was taking over these wineries, they were sort of seeing that the business was not really good. And what was happening was that Italian wines were losing their popularity around the world. So what happened in some of these families was they actually, the young generation said, Father, Grandpa, you know, you guys have been working so hard for so long. Why don't you take it a little easy now? You go, you spend a little more time with the grandkids, you go for holidays, you know, you work in the office where it's nice and cool, leave everything to me. And they said, oh, great, fantastic. So they went off and they had long lunches and they played with the grandkids. And what they didn't know is that they went in and they pulled up some of the their Italian grapes and they planted these French grapes. They did not tell them because they knew if they did, they'd be out there ripping them up again. That's true story. But what it was is, again, Italy's very good at growing grapes. They've got the right soil, they've got the right conditions, and these French grape varieties, the Cabernet and the Merlot, actually produced really, really beautiful wine. But the Italians, being Italians and being proud, what they wanted to do, they didn't want to make just another French wine in Italy. They wanted to make something that was unique to Italy and gave respect to Italy. So what they did is they used the main grape of Tuscany, the Sangiovese, and they blended it. So they had the Sangiovese grape, the Cabernet Sauvignon, and the Merlot, and they blended them together, and it produced a phenomenal wine. And it became, this style of wine became very, very popular throughout the world. So it was a big, big thing. And when we go back to the classification of the quality, the table wine, IGT, DOC, DOCG, the IGT wasn't there. It was only the table wine and the DOC, DOCG. And because they were making these phenomenal wines that were winning awards all over the world, and they were able to sell them for very, very high quality, a lot of money, but they could only classify them as a VDT, table wine, because it was using French grapes, which weren't allowed in the recipe of the DOC and the DOCG. So and this made the winemakers very upset because, you know, we're producing this great wine, it's this, and you're making it, label it as this VDT, which is the stuff that the Italians drink themselves. They'd have a bottle of table wine for lunch. They only drank half. They didn't care. They'd leave the other half and they would go. So it was having the same quality classification as this table wine. So that's when the government said, okay, we're going to introduce a new level, which is this IGT. So if you see IGT on the label, it basically, there's a very good chance that the wine made in Italy with the IGT has French grapes in it. And that's why we have that classification. So that's kind of a little bit of the history of that, but true story. Growing French grapes, not telling anyone, until they were winning the awards and selling them for 5 times as much money as they were selling it previously. And then the grandparents and the parents kind of came around, I think, after that. So Abruzzo, which is here on the coast, Abruzzo is actually a very mountainous area. It's about 65% mountains. 42 million cases of wine are produced here, which is, again, a huge amount. And again, in Italy, they can grow wine like crazy. So very, very productive area. Most of the wine that's produced, though, is sold to cooperatives, and these cooperatives sell the wine to Piedmont and to Veneto, and they blend them. So that the wineries of Piedmont and Veneto will take these wines and blend them and sell them that way. Produce a wine, Montepulciano, red wine in the United States and the UK, very, very famous wine. Calabria, and Calabria is actually down here at the toe of the boot. And again, this is Italy. They call it the boot. There's the heel of the boot, the toe of the boot, and it's kicking a ball, which is Sicily. And Calabria, I like to talk about not so much for the wines of Calabria, because Calabria actually produced very simple wines. The quality level of these wines is not very good. But Calabria was an area of Italy that was very industrialized. It was a very, very poor area. There wasn't a lot of opportunity. There wasn't a lot of wealth to be made there. And especially after the World War II, this area was really decimated, the economy. There was no jobs, there was no businesses to be able to do. So what happened was the people of Calabria, actually a lot of people left to go to the New World to try and build their fortunes, because there was absolutely nothing that they could do back in Calabria. The economy was so bad. And it was these people that left Calabria that moved to the United States and moved to Argentina, that actually brought in this new wave of winemakers and wine production in the New World. So a lot of the growth of wine production in California and in Argentina was started by the Italians that were leaving Calabria, taking their winemaking methods, taking even their grape varieties. They were taking cuttings of the grapes with them when they go to sell to the United States. So the winemaking in California in 1900, a lot of them talk about Calabria history of the people that were taking their winemaking techniques to the rest of the world. And then we have Sicily. Okay. Can you hear me now? I lost you.
Yes, we can hear you. Yes.
Okay, great. And then we have the area of Sicily, and Sicily is a beautiful area. Sicily is actually the largest island in the Mediterranean. Sicily has one of the oldest wine growing areas in all of the area. They say it's, I've seen a couple of things. I've seen where they've been making wine there for 2,500 years. I've also seen some research that shows the history goes back further to about 4,000 years. It is an area of produces a complex amount of wines there. And if you can see here, this is Sicily. We went here on the wine tour. We actually flew into Palermo and we visited Marsala, which is a famous dessert wine that is produced in Sicily. Again, ancient history. They had a lot of influences, not just from Italy, from the mainland of Italy. They also had it from around the Mediterranean. You had countries from Middle East and Africa that had influences into Sicily. So there's really a diversity of culture in Sicily. And actually the food is very interesting because you are getting this African influence and Middle Eastern influence into the food of Sicily. We had some just phenomenal food there. They have, again, Marsala is a very, very famous wine. If you're looking at classic Italian recipes, there's veal Marsala, chicken Marsala. It's actually a phenomenal wine, and people only know it using it in a recipe to make food. But it is a beautiful dessert wine to be drunk on its own. And Sicily now is actually producing some of the most exciting wines that are going into the wine industry right now throughout the world. The wines of Sicily are in huge demand in fine restaurants and fine wine shops around the world. They have their own classic grape, Nero d'Avola, as well as some other grape varieties that are classic to Sicily, but they are also making wine out of the international grape varieties, Cabernet, Merlot, Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, etc. And because Sicily was a volcano, was an active volcano for a long time, the whole island is basically a volcano. The soil is very rich volcanic soil, and it adds a really particularly unique element of earthiness to the wine. So you're getting a classic Cabernet Sauvignon being produced in Sicily, but it has this unique characteristic because of this volcano. And it's really, really a little bit about Italy. Italy is probably the most difficult in the world to know everything about it because of all of the vast regions that it number of sub-regions and sub-regions about grapes and the different stuff. Basic Euro wine tour next year when you become third year. We are going back to Italy, and we are going to be going to Piedmont, which is at the very top. So if you're really smart, you get high marks, good attendance, you decide to pursue F&B as a career, you can compete and maybe join me, Burgundy, to visit the wine regions of Burgundy. So with that, I will turn it over to any questions that the students may have.
Yes, Mr. Kit, thank you so much for the session. There were a lot to learn. I have already shared my WhatsApp number to all of you all students. So if you have any question which you want me to address it to Mr. Kit, you can WhatsApp me, and I'll certainly now ask Mr. Kit to answer that. And we'll have a nice Q&A session, I'm sure.
Super. And I also
Mr. Kit,
brought pictures of what one can expect of Italy. If you look at this.
Yes, sir. You can talk.
Can you hear?
So your voice is breaking a lot, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. No, we're having some connection issues. So.
Yes.
Anyway, so this is just some pictures from Italy. Why it's so popular, as you can see, it's just incredibly beautiful. These old villas, and again, lots of hills and mountains. It's really beautiful. This is actually a winery that we visited not during the Euro. We have been to this winery with the Euro wine tour. I think it was the first year we went. It's Tenuta di Valgiano. So while we're waiting for some questions, I can show some pictures.
Nice.
This is the main building that we went to. This is where she lives. And this is us having lunch. This is the owner. Where is she? Laura. She's hiding somewhere. And I think you might recognize a few people. There's Pinky Kenworthy. There's Laura. She's the owner.
Yes.
There's Sean and Pinky. They were visiting with me when we went there.
Good.
And we had lots of wine and food. And Sean in the kitchen helping out. There's everybody, coffee afterwards, tour of the winery. There's the grapes. So it's a lot of fun. So that's why I'm sort of teasing the students that hopefully will make it to the wine tour, and then you can have that same experience visiting the wineries.
Yes. So I got a question from one of the students. He wants to ask a question that what makes the difference between DOC and DOCG wine?
Okay, again, DOC,
No, we can't hear you, sir. I'm so sorry, but
of
can't hear you.
yeah. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yes, it is better, sir.
Okay, so DOC is it's a defined region. So there's a physical definition of the area, and then also within the physical definition of the area, there's rules and regulations about how wine can be made. There's a recipe. The ingredients are there that are allowed. The types of grape varieties that are allowed are there. How the grapes can be grown, how the wine can be made. So this is a defined area, and the reason we have that is because they know that in this particular area, these particular grapes grow very well, and if they're grown in a particular way, they produce very good quality fruit. So the more rules and regulations they have, they're trying to maintain the quality of the wine that's being produced there.
Mhm.
And then DOCG is the highest level. And again, if they submit their wines to the government, they do a tasting of the wine. And if the wine achieves a particular category, then they'll give it the G. So they need to not only make wine with the rules and regulations that are in place, they have to make very good wine in order to get the recognition CG, which is, I hope that.
So I have the next question from one of the student. He wants to ask why Italian wine has a lesser tannin than French wine.
Less what?
Lesser tannin.
Less tannin.
Yes.
They don't. Tannin is different depending on the grape variety.
True.
So there are some grapes in Italy that are very high in tannin, and there are other grapes that are very low in tannin. It's not specific to Italy. It's by the grape variety. And again, you have to understand your grape varieties to be able to know which ones are. So yeah, there's similarities in both countries.
So would you like to talk about a bit on Orvieto wine, please? Wines from Orvieto.
Orvieto?
Yes.
Again, Orvieto is a place name wine. It is around the area of Orvieto. To be honest, off the top of my head, I don't remember the grape varieties for that, but Orvieto is a white wine. It's a very light, refreshing wine. Yeah, it's quite popular. Orvieto wines you'll find in a lot of the wine, but a lot of the Orvieto wines that are available in the United States are more of the simple kind of average quality, but they actually produce some very, very high quality of Orvieto, but you just don't see much of it outside of Italy.
Mm-hmm. I have one of the question asked by one of my colleague that the vinification during Chianti wine making process known as Gavarno, that's Gavarno, and how does it work? If you could just elaborate a bit.
How do you spell that again?
That's Gaverno. That's Gavarno.
Gaverno.
Correct. Yeah.
And that's a wine making method?
It's a vinification process. It is a vinification process, and they follow while producing Chianti as a wine. I mean, Sangiovese as a grape. So, if you could like to elaborate that making process.
I don't, just off the top of my head, I don't quite remember that. I don't understand that question, so I can't answer that. That's a good Google question, though. It sounds like.
All right, certainly, yeah. So I'm waiting for questions, students. If you have any, you can WhatsApp me. I have already shared my number in chat box. We have about 10 more minutes. You can ask me questions, and I'll address it to Mr. Keith to answer them. So it is just one of my question. Like we all know that the grape variety is being used in while making Valpolicella as a wine. So do you recommend Valpolicella supposed to be served a little cooler than the regular red wine?
Yeah, absolutely. Valpolicella is that kind of wine that
Yeah.
actually does um, benefit from being a little bit cooler. Anytime you get a wine that is a little bit lighter and fruitier in style, for example, Beaujolais is one of
Beaujolais.
those. It just is a little bit more suited um, to being a little. Actually, prefer wine to be cool,
Mhm.
not chilled, but cool. So yeah. Ah, I see what Governo. Um, yeah, Governo is a process where, because again, for fermentation, you need to have sugar and yeast, and the yeast eats the sugar and then converts it into alcohol. Sometimes the grape juice that you have, it gets stuck fermentation. The fermentation stops. So what they do is they add this sort of dried grapes juice, or this more concentrated grape juice, which is very, very high in sugar. They add that into their fermentation tank, and it basically adds a boost of sugar into it that then will restart fermentation. So it's basically it's a process that's used to fix stuck fermentation. Fermentation is stopped. They need to get it going again. So they add this concentrated grape juice, which is coming from these semi-dried grapes, and that's where we get that from. So.
Mhm. So as you said, that Valpolicella, there are a few regions like Amarone. They do have a different process of making Valpolicella as a wine. They have those different layers to keep grapes for a couple of months. So
Yeah, well,
do you think
yeah,
that
this
Amarone della Valpolicella will be a little sweeter than the regular other Valpolicella?
um it's not sweeter because again, during fermentation, all of the sugar is consumed by the yeast.
Hmm.
So what you do get is Amarone because it starts off with a higher concentration of sugar.
Hmm.
Sugar is converted into alcohol.
Yes,
So Amarone has a higher percentage of alcohol.
I see. All right. Okay.
You can see I was looking at some labels in the wine shop when we were in Veneto, and you could see Amarone there at 17% alcohol, which is very, very, very high.
Yes.
Um, on average, wine is sort of 13.5%, somewhere in there. So it's a very, very high. But again, you're having lots of sugar, but also it's not just higher alcohol wines. The Amarone wines are just very intense, very flavorful. They're really beautiful wines. They're very unique in its flavor. Um, it actually has one of the nose characteristics that you can get from Amarone is balsamic.
Hmm.
That's how you can spot an Amarone. So
Hmm.
yeah, it's a really beautiful wine.
Uh, so what there are different types of Chianti we have heard. Like if you could just talk about a bit to our students, like Chianti Classico, Rufino, and the regular Chianti. So that will be a really
Yeah.
helpful information.
And again, remember I told you how difficult Italy was to learn about their wines? Okay, imagine you've got Tuscany,
Yes.
and then within Tuscany, you have the region of Chianti. And within the region of Chianti, you have Chianti Rufino. And some other, I don't know, I think there's 9 different areas. And in the very center of Chianti is Chianti Classico. And Chianti Classico was actually the original DOC. It was the original defined area wine region in the world 304 years ago was when they did the classification of Chianti Classico. So this is the original area. And the differences are quite, because again, the recipe changes between Chianti Rufina, for example, and Chianti Classico. Chianti Classico, the yield that is allowed, the amount of grapes, how many tons of grapes per hectare is a lot less than in Chianti Rufina. the grapes that you can put into the blend are different in Chianti Rafina. There's a higher percentage of Cabernet, or a higher percentage of Sangiovese for Chianti Classico. I think it's 80% is the minimum. Chianti Rafina potentially is 70%. I'm not sure. So the recipe changes. And again, the terroir is different. Chianti Classico is the best area within Chianti for that has the best terroir for growing grapes in that particular region. But again, it just gets to explain how complicated Italy is when it comes to that, because there's the region, the sub-region, the sub-region, the sub-region.
Sir, as you said that certain percentage will be obviously made by Sangiovese, but what about the rest of the percentage? It is the local grape do they use, or the international grapes they look for?
No, it's all local grapes.
Okay.
There's Colorino, there's Colorino, and there's a few grapes. I don't remember them all off the top of my head, but there's a few other grapes that are allowed in the recipe. But again, it's still the primary percentage. The higher percentage needs to be Sangiovese.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No problem.
So waiting for more questions, students. We have a couple of more minutes. If you have anything to ask Mr. Keith through me. All right. So seems like no other questions left from students. So kind of we can end the session then. No, not sir.
No
if you wish to ask any question to sir.
No. I think anyway.
Thank you so much, Tariq sir. In fact, I got my answer when you was actually talking about the Valpolicella.
Yes.
And yeah, my question got sorted. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thank
Okay,
you
great.
so much,
So
Mr. Keith. Thank you.
I'll see you next time, and we'll talk about Spain and a little bit on Germany.
Oh yes, looking forward.
Okay.
Yes.
So, bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care, sir. Take care. Take care, students. Have a great day. Thank you.